Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video we need to talk about Watchtower's biggest problem. Now when you saw this title, maybe you thought, oh, he's going to be talking about all of the various abuse scandals, the lawsuits, that sort of thing. It's not really about that. Those are obviously problems. There's certainly problems that impact on people's lives. But this video is specifically talking about a problem from Watchtower's perspective. So imagine you're the governing body. What would be the biggest problem for you? And when you think about what a group of men who are interested in accumulating power and prestige might be concerned about, your mind immediately drifts to the prosperity of the organization in terms of money, in terms of property, in terms of its ability to continue growing and expanding and prospering years or decades into the future. And in that regard, Watchtower has a huge problem. I've actually been writing about this problem off and on for a number of years now, going all the way back to when I was writing on forums and writing blog articles. The problem that will most be keeping the governing body awake at night, or will be of most concern to them, is the fact that there is a huge imbalance between the growth in poor countries and the growth in countries that aren't poor, in developed countries. If you're an international organization reliant on contributions from your followers, you need there to be sort of equal growth between the prosperous countries and the poorer countries. Ideally, you would want there to be more growth in the richer countries, because then your followers in richer countries will have more money to contribute, you'll have more money coming in. What you don't want is for there to be tiny growth in richer countries and disproportionately large growth in poorer countries, because that's not a sustainable model. What's happening is that lots of people are joining your organization in countries where people don't have enough money to contribute. And that will actually cause a drain on the meager funds coming in from the richer countries, because the richer countries aren't just having to pay for themselves in terms of, I don't know, printing, facilities, construction, that sort of thing. They're also having to send money to these developing countries where people can't afford to have their own literature printed and can't afford to build their own kingdom halls, etc. So that is a huge problem. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting, given the fact that we've recently had the 2019 figures published, if I did some digging, if I checked the statistics on poverty that are available on Wikipedia and put those against the figures that Watchtower produces for growth. And in case you missed my last video where I was looking at the service report, I'm limited to basing my figures on peak publisher numbers rather than average publisher numbers, because Watchtower didn't give us those numbers for 2 or 3 years. So I have to go off the peak numbers. I'd rather go off the average numbers, but peak numbers it is. And what I did was I tried to find poverty statistics for each and every country on the service reports. Now, when I say poverty statistics, the metric I decided to use was the percentage of population living on less than $5.50 per day. So as you can imagine, there are a number of countries where a significant percentage of the population are living on less than $5.50 per day. There are some countries where virtually no one is living on so little money. In fact, Switzerland has 0% people in that country living on less than $5.50 per day. So that's the metric I decided to go with. Now, it should be noted that there were a number of countries that I couldn't include in my calculations because either Wikipedia didn't have numbers for the country or Watchtower didn't have numbers for the country, say, for example, because it was a country like China or Somalia, which is in the 30 other lands, or for some other reason. So I made a list of all the countries that aren't included in these figures, and just for the sake of completeness, I am showing them to you now. And it is worth pointing out that all of these countries account for only 422,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, bear in mind that the number of peak publishers for Jehovah's Witnesses in 2019 was 8.6 million. So basically, the numbers that I wasn't able to use account for only 5% of Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think that that gives us a fairly strong basis for using the other countries that I could calculate figures for and drawing a few conclusions. So when I took all of the countries that I was able to do this calculation for, comparing publisher growth with poverty, this is the graph that I came up with. So what we're seeing here is that in countries where less than a quarter of people are in poverty, the percentage of growth was only 2%, whereas the picture changes quite significantly for countries where the majority of people are in poverty, and particularly for countries where between 75 and 100% of people are living on less than $5.50 per day. The organization has managed growth of 14.71%. So this basically is Watchtower's biggest problem. This is the last thing you want if you are an international religious organization reliant on people sending in their donations. You do not want the most prosperous countries to have weak growth and the poorest countries to have disproportionately high growth. It's not a sustainable model. Now, just for the nerds among you, I'm going to quickly show you the data upon which these figures are based. So you can see here, these are the countries with less than a quarter of the population in poverty. These are the countries with between 25% and 50% of the population in poverty. These are the countries with between 50% and 75% of the population in poverty. And these are the countries with between 75% and 100% of the population in poverty. I wanted to show you those figures for those of you who may say, oh, well, you know, this is just this guy's calculations. And again, I would just stress, I am no mathematician. I'm using the skills that I picked up in high school, but I think these figures are fairly meaningful. I will be putting the link for the Wikipedia page that I used in the description so that you can cross-check them if you want to. I should just mention, by the way, that there are exceptions to the rule. I did find when I was going through these figures that there were countries where there was lots of poverty, but inexplicably Watchtower wasn't doing very well. Conversely, there were countries where there is very little poverty, but Watchtower was doing well. So there are always exceptions to the rule, and I'm sure that there are various local factors at play which we can't really go into in a single video, which will explain some of those anomalies. But whichever way you spin it, these are just not good figures for Watchtower. And incidentally, I thought it would be interesting if I could isolate the countries that have less than 1% of their population in poverty. So for the purpose of my figures, there were 21 such countries. You'll remember I mentioned that Switzerland had 0% poverty. But here are the countries with less than 1% of their population living on less than $5.50 per day. And you'll notice that in 3 years, I should have mentioned at the beginning that all of these figures that I'm giving you are not just based on 2019, but from 2016 through 2019. So in 3 years, Watchtower has only managed growth in these countries combined of minus 0.01%. And I think that tells us everything about the nature of this organization, because quite apart from the problems for Watchtower of an imbalance between growth in poorer countries and less growth in richer countries, quite apart from all that, the take-home message from all of this is that the Jehovah's Witness organization is an organization that preys on misfortune. It preys on poverty. It cannot grow meaningfully in countries where people don't have too many problems financially, in countries where there is social mobility. Watchtower really struggles in countries where you're less likely to be living in the dirt and less likely to be miserable and desperate. In countries where you are more likely to be miserable and desperate because of the political and economic factors in your country, while you have a higher likelihood of being attracted to the message of Jehovah's Witnesses. That says everything about the organization. Because if you're an organization that preys on desperation, then you are a desperate organization yourself. Your message should make sense to everybody, irrespective of how well they're doing financially, irrespective of how secure they are, of how prosperous they are, of how wealthy they are. If you have the truth, it should just make sense to people from all walks of life. But that's not what we're finding. We're finding that when people don't have as many problems and aren't as desperate and aren't as miserable, Watchtower struggles. But in countries where people are really up against it, all of a sudden, the message starts to make a bit more sense. So, make of all of this what you will. I hope you found this information useful. Again, I've been talking about this for quite some time now, but I thought it would be an interesting opportunity, given the 2019 service report, to revisit this. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos, for heaven's sake. And as always, thank you so much for watching.